Everyone looks at the UFC and sees the world leader in combat sports, thinking Dana White is the savior who rescued fighting from the corruption of boxing, creating the only league that matters. You nod along, thinking the UFC belt is the only gold that shines. But I want you to lock eyes with me right now and feel the cold sweat running down the back of your neck, because everything you think you know is a manufactured hallucination. The reality is, we are watching a hostage situation disguised as a sport. The UFC isn't a league. It's a calculated wage suppression machine designed to keep the most dangerous men on the planet starving so they stay obedient. And right now, Dana White is having a complete psychological breakdown behind closed doors because the Saudis didn't just buy boxing. They bought the key to the handcuffs, and they are setting the slaves free. We need to rip the Band-Aid off this wound and look at the infection underneath. We are talking about the deliberate sabotage of an entire sport just to keep UFC fighter pay in the gutter. I'm not guessing here. I'm telling you what I see in the shadows. Let me take you back to last Tuesday. I was in Austin in the back of this speakeasy that you need a fingerprint to get into. I'm sitting across from a guy, a legend, a guy whose face is on your pay-per-view posters. A guy who has bled buckets for the UFC. He wasn't eating. He was just staring at a glass of whiskey like it was a crystal ball showing him his own funeral. The air in that room was thick, smelling of old leather and absolute terror. He slides a phone across the table to me. On the screen is a text message thread with a Saudi promoter. The numbers, they didn't even look real. It looked like a phone number, not a payout. Then he shows me his UFC contract renewal offer. It was an insult. It was a spit in the face. He looked up at me, and I saw a man who had realized he'd been living in a cage his whole life and not just the octagon. He whispered, "Joe, Dana isn't protecting the sport. He's suppressing the market. He needs boxing to die, because if boxing lives, we realize what we are actually worth." Do you understand the level of psychological manipulation required to pull this off? For 20 years, Dana White has been running a psyop. Every time he gets on a microphone, what does he do? He trashes boxing. Boxing is broken. Boxing is corrupt. Nobody watches boxing. Why is he so obsessed? Why does he care? I'll tell you why. Because if boxing is viewed as legitimate, then the pay structure of boxing becomes the benchmark. And if the pay structure of boxing is the benchmark, the UFC's business model, which is based on taking 85% of the revenue and throwing crumbs to the fighters, collapses overnight. He tried to make boxing pay less. That was the goal. If he could convince the world that boxers are overpaid divas, he could justify paying a UFC champion less than a warm-up act in a ring. It was a suppression tactic. It was about keeping the fighters poor enough that they had to fight 3 times a year just to pay their taxes. A hungry fighter is an obedient fighter. A rich fighter tells you to go to hell. And then the Saudis entered the chat. This is what Dana didn't account for. He accounted for business rivals. He accounted for other promoters. He didn't account for a kingdom with infinite wealth that doesn't care about quarterly profit margins. The Saudis looked at the landscape and saw the exploitation. They saw these warriors, these modern-day samurais, begging for performance of the night bonuses like dogs begging for scraps. And Riyadh said, "No, we will treat them like kings." I've been to these events in Saudi Arabia. It's not just a fight card, it's a shifting of the tectonic plates of history. You walk into those arenas, and the air smells different. It smells like oud, gold, and freedom. The fighters walking out in Riyadh, look at their eyes. The desperation is gone. The fear of, what happens if I lose, is gone. They are fighting for legacy, not for their mortgage. Dana is terrified because the Saudis have exposed the lie. When Francis Ngannou left the UFC, the narrative machine went into overdrive. They tried to bury him. They said he was scared to fight Jones. They said he was greedy. They tried to assassinate his character. Why? Because Francis was the first one to step out of the plantation and walk into the palace. And when he made more money in one fight against Tyson Fury than he made in his entire UFC career combined, that wasn't just a payday. That was a signal flare fired into the sky for every other fighter to see. It broke the spell. It disrupted the simulation. Now you have Dana screaming at reporters. You have him banning media who ask about the Saudi cards. You have him trying to rewrite history. He's acting like a cornered animal because he knows the fighters are talking. In the locker rooms, in the gyms, in the saunas, they aren't talking about the belt anymore. They are talking about Riyadh. They are whispering about the Saudi money. They are realizing that the UFC prestige is just a shiny object used to distract them while their pockets are picked. The Saudis are proving that you can pay fighters millions and still put on a massive show. They are proving that the money was always there. Dana just kept it. He kept it to build the PI, to buy hotels, to fuel his gambling, to feed the machine. He tried to artificially lower the value of violence. He tried to set a price cap on human sacrifice. And now, the market is correcting itself with a vengeance. The UFC fighters are looking at the boxers in Saudi Arabia, and they aren't seeing boring fights. They are seeing respect. They are seeing generational wealth. And that makes them angry. And an angry fighter who realizes his promoter is his enemy, that is the most dangerous thing in the world. The walls of the empire are cracking, and the sand is pouring in. You think this is just business? You think this is just numbers on a spreadsheet? No, no, no. You have to go deeper. You have to look at the wiring under the dashboard. This is psychological warfare. This is about the systematic conditioning of human beings to accept less than they are worth until they are grateful for the crumbs. We are watching the deprogramming of a cult in real time. The UFC isn't just a promoter. It operates like a high control group. Think about it. They take these young men and women, killers, absolute savages, and they isolate them. They tell them, "We are the only game in town. The world outside these walls, it's scary. Boxing is dead. The other leagues are minor leagues. You need us." They create a dependency that is terrifying. It's a trauma bond. It's Stockholm Syndrome with 4-ounce gloves. I want to tell you about a moment that haunts me. I was backstage at an Apex card a few months ago. The Apex, God, that place. It feels like a sterile laboratory where they run experiments on rats. No crowd noise to hide the sound of snapping ligaments. Just the dull thud of flesh on canvas and the heavy breathing of men fighting for their lives. I saw a kid, just won his debut. Brutally tough fight. His face was a mask of blood, nose shifted across his face like a tectonic plate. He's sitting on a folding chair, shaking, adrenaline crashing, and he's holding his phone, refreshing the feed, waiting to see if he got the $50,000 bonus. He looked up at his coach, tears mixing with the blood, and asked, "Do you think Dana liked it? Do you think I did enough?" That broke me. Do you understand how sick that is? This kid just took years off his life, probably scrambled his brain permanently, and he's begging for a bonus that is barely a rounding error for the casino Dana gambled at the night before. That $50,000 is a leash. It's a control mechanism. By keeping the base pay low and the bonuses arbitrary, Dana plays God. He decides who eats. He decides who gets to pay off their camp. It keeps them desperate. It keeps them performing like circus animals hoping for a treat. And that is exactly what the Saudis are destroying. When Turki Al-Alshik and the Saudis entered the game, they didn't bring bonuses. They brought guarantees. They brought dignity. They looked at the performance bonus culture and laughed. In Riyadh, you don't have to beg the king for a tip after you dance. The king pays you what you are worth before you step in the ring. This is shattering the psychological conditioning of the UFC fighter. I've heard stories, insider chatter from the guys who move between the worlds, about UFC fighters training with boxers who just came back from a Saudi card. The boxer pulls up in a new G-Wagon, talks about how they were treated like royalty, how they had their own dedicated medical team, how the hospitality was unmatched. And the UFC fighter who is driving a rental car and fighting with a torn meniscus because he can't afford the surgery until his next check just stares. You can see the gears turning in their heads. Wait, I'm the one doing the MMA. I'm the one doing the harder sport. I'm the one wrestling, kicking, boxing, and grappling. Why am I the pauper and he is the prince? It creates a dissonance, a glitch in the matrix. Dana knows this. That's why he's so angry. It's not about the money loss. It's about the loss of control. If fighters realize they don't need to be grateful for the opportunity to bleed for peanuts, the whole house of cards collapses. The UFC business model relies on the fighters subsidizing the show with their own bodies. They pay for their camps, their nutrition, their travel sometimes, their medicals. The UFC extracts the value and outsources the risk. But the Saudis are flipping the script. They are saying, "We will take the risk. You bring the talent." I spoke to a manager, shady guy, wears sunglasses indoors, you know the type, and he told me that the UFC brass is currently running a counterintelligence campaign. They are trying to convince fighters that the Saudi money is dirty or temporary. They are telling them, don't go over there, they'll use you and dump you. Stay here, stay with the family. The family? What family? The family that cuts you the second you lose 2 in a row. The family that erases your footage if you speak out against the brand. That's not a family, that's a meat grinder. And let's talk about the boring narrative Dana pushes. He says boxing is boring. The Saudis are killing the sport with these mismatched cards. Are you kidding me? Have you seen the cards they are putting together? They are making the fights that boxing politics prevented for decades. They are playing fantasy booker in real life. They are doing what the UFC claims to do, the best versus the best. But they are actually paying the athletes. Dana hates it because it exposes his business genius as simple exploitation. It's easy to be profitable when your labor cost is 15% of your revenue. Any idiot can run a business like that. The Saudis are showing that you can pay the fighters 70, 80% and still put on a spectacle. The psychological damage on Dana is palpable. He's aging in dog years right now. Watch him. The redness in the face isn't just blood pressure, it's the internal screaming of a man who realizes his monopoly is over. He spent 20 years building a walled garden, keeping the fighters inside, telling them the world outside was a wasteland. And now, the Saudis just drove a bulldozer through the wall, and the fighters can see the oasis. They can smell the water. I had a dream the other night. Crazy, vivid dream. I was in the octagon, but the fence wasn't chain link. It was made of receipts, thousands of receipts for medical bills, gym fees, coach percentages, and in the center was a fighter screaming, but no sound was coming out. And above him, in the rafters, sat the executives, laughing, drinking wine that looked suspiciously like blood. And then the lights went out. And when they came back on, the cage was gone. The executives were gone. And the fighter was standing in the desert under the stars holding a bag of gold. It wasn't a dream, it was a prophecy. The system is reacting like a virus is attacking it. The antibodies are coming out. You're going to see more hit pieces on boxing. You're going to see the UFC partnering with other entities to try and block the Saudi expansion. But you cannot stop an idea whose time has come. And the idea is simple. The man who bleeds deserves the gold. This is a spiritual war for the soul of combat sports. On one side, you have the corporate vampire squid, sucking the life out of the warriors to feed the stock price for endeavor. On the other side, you have a disruptor with infinite resources who is willing to burn the old system to the ground just to see what rises from the ashes. And the fighters, they are waking up from the coma. They are pulling the IV tubes out of their arms. They are looking around the hospital room and realizing they aren't sick, they were just being poisoned. And now the market is correcting itself with a vengeance. The UFC fighters are looking at the boxers in Saudi Arabia, and they aren't seeing boring fights. They are seeing respect. They are seeing generational wealth, and that makes them angry. And an angry fighter who realizes his promoter is his enemy, that is the most dangerous thing in the world. The walls of the empire are cracking, and the sand is pouring in. Listen to that silence. Do you hear it? That is the sound of an empire holding its breath right before the guillotine drops. We are standing at the edge of the cliff, and Dana White is staring down into the abyss, realizing there is no bottom. This ends one of two ways, and neither of them ends well for the machine in Las Vegas. We are moving toward a singularity in combat sports. The collision course is set. You have the immovable object of corporate greed versus the unstoppable force of infinite wealth. And let me tell you something about physics. When money is no object, gravity doesn't apply. I had a conversation with a guy who specializes in geopolitical risk assessment. Scary dude, looks like he hasn't slept since the Cold War. He told me, "Joe, you're looking at this like it's a sports rivalry. It's not. It's a hostile takeover of Western culture." He said the Saudis aren't just trying to compete with the UFC. They are preparing to buy the very ground the UFC stands on. Imagine this scenario. It's 2026. The Saudis announce a global super league, MMA and boxing combined. No contracts, just massive, one-off super fights. The prize money, 10 times the UFC purse. What happens to the UFC roster? It evaporates. It turns to dust. The champions vacate the belts. The contenders refuse to sign. The UFC becomes a feeder league, a regional show where you fight just to get noticed by the sheikhs. Dana White becomes the manager of a minor league baseball team, screaming at the umpire while the Yankees play in the stadium next door. That is the nightmare that wakes Dana up at 3 a.m. That is the ghost in his hallway. He knows that loyalty in this game is rented. You can't pay rent with loyalty. You can't eat opportunity. The fighters know this now. The veil has been lifted. You can see it in the press conferences. The reporters, even the ones on the payroll, are starting to ask the uncomfortable questions. The energy has shifted. It's like being at a party where the music just stopped and everyone realizes the house is on fire. And here is the darkest truth of all, the thing that really twists the knife. The UFC brought this on themselves. They had 20 years to do the right thing. They had 20 years to make the fighters partners instead of products. They could have built a system where the warriors shared in the spoils, but they got greedy. They squeezed every penny, cut every corner, and treated the athletes like disposable razor blades. They created a vacuum of resentment, and nature abhors a vacuum. The Saudis just walked in and filled it with gold. Now look at me. Look right into the lens. You are complicit in this. Every time you bought the lie that fighters don't want to fight, you were feeding the machine. Every time you laughed when Dana mocked a fighter for asking for more money, you were tightening the handcuffs. We are all guilty. We watched the gladiators die and cheered for the emperor, but the emperor has no clothes. He's standing there, red-faced and shaking, holding a contract that isn't worth the paper it's printed on. The shift is happening. The tectonic plates have snapped. The next time you see a UFC card, look closely. Look past the lights. Look past the ring girls. Look at the logo on the canvas. It's fading. It's a relic of an era that is already over. The future is in the desert. The future is violent. It is rich, and it doesn't care about the old guard. They are going to try to delete this. They are going to shadow ban this video. The algorithm is designed to protect the status quo. They don't want you to know that the plantation gates are open. They want you to stay asleep. But you're awake now. You've seen the numbers. You've smelled the fear. So here is my warning to you. Don't look away when the collapse happens. Don't let them rewrite the history books. Remember who starved the fighters and remember who set them free. It wasn't the nice guys in suits in Las Vegas. It was the disruptive force that exposed the truth. The game is over. The scoreboard has been reset. Share this video, download it, put it on a hard drive, because I promise you, the powers that be are scrubbing the internet as we speak. They are trying to patch the glitch, but it's too late. The code is rewritten. The king is dead. Long live the fighters. This is a spiritual war for the soul of combat sports. On one side, you have the corporate vampire squid, sucking the life out of the warriors to feed the stock price for Endeavor. On the other side, you have a disruptor with infinite resources who is willing to burn the old system to the ground just to see what rises from the ashes. And the fighters, they are waking up from the coma. They are pulling the IV tubes out of their arms. They are looking around the hospital room and realizing they aren't sick. They were just being poisoned. And now the market is correcting itself with a vengeance. The UFC fighters are looking at the boxers in Saudi Arabia and they aren't seeing boring fights. They are seeing respect. They are seeing generational wealth, and that makes them angry. And an angry fighter who realizes his promoter is his enemy, that is the most dangerous thing in the world. The walls of the empire are cracking, and the sand is pouring in.